Thank you for the opportunity for me to join you and chat to you today about best practices in racking safety. My name is karl. I'm with the company Ross International Rack Repair, and we specialize in rack maintenance in South Africa. Now, as supply chain managers, logistics managers, we typically have this dream in our heads of what we imagine our warehouse will look like. We may use certain buzzwords like effective, efficient, smooth, clean. As you see over here, everything well orderly. However, sadly, this is sometimes what we get. We get rack collapses, costing us huge amounts of money, sadly sometimes life. Insurance policy claims out, courts, investigations. It can absolutely turn into a mess. It's one of our biggest fears as logistical professionals, and something that we do not ever want to experience for ourselves. Now, we all wish that our MHE would look something like this, a modified bumper car. That would be nice, great, and cost effective. However, it's just not really a feasible solution, and we would just not get any work done. The guys would be having way too much fun in the warehouse. What we'll be looking at is why do racking systems fail. We'll touch on some of the main reasons that have been identified in no particular order. We'll go through those. We'll also look at what does certification mean to you and how you can prevent your rack damage going forward. So the main reasons why these systems seem to fail is, and again, like I said, not in any particular order, inexperienced materials handling operators. We find this very prominent, especially in large organizations with high staff turnover. The guys are just not properly trained and experienced to operate these machines. Leads to quite a lot of damage, unnecessary waste of money. Another reason we find is that the use of the incorrect material handling equipment. We actually investigated one warehouse where they were going through exorbitant amount of damages, and it was found that the aisles were just too narrow for the machine that they were using, rendering it totally ineffective, and it was just a solution that was just not feasible. Civil and structural failures. We find this a lot in cold rooms where the floor subsides slightly, cracks, fractures under the racking system does tend to result in the racking shifting slightly, and it can result into catastrophic failures. Ineffective rack design, largely out of your control as your supply chain manager or logistical manager. But what I'd like to say about it is make sure you choose the right racking supplier, someone that knows systems, knows your requirements, and can design a system that's going to ultimately meet all your requirements. It's not going to render a huge expense and be ineffective. Use of inferior rack material with low tensile strengths. Sadly, we are finding this more and more in South Africa, where importing becomes a far more cost-effective solution. Guys tend to partner with incorrect suppliers internationally, not sure what they're getting. When it does get here, they land in a position where it just can't carry what they plan to load onto it. Incorrect installations. Again, make sure you choose the right racking suppliers. There's a lot of fly-by-night guys going out there saying they can install racking. Fair enough, they might be able to install racking, but how effectively can they install the racking? Will it be installed perpendicular? Will it be long-lasting and safe? Overloading. This is largely in the control of the warehouse managers. Making sure that you don't try and put product when your SKU profile changes, that you try and load it into the racking without first assessing if it can actually carry that load. Unapproved rack design changes. Something that's completely overlooked more often than not, where people go and adjust the racking themselves thinking, it doesn't really matter if the beam is here or there, it should still be able to carry it. Rather just get a professional look at your system. They'll tell you honestly if it can or not work with the given changes that you're planning on doing. And lastly, poor or no rack maintenance programs. Sadly, many guys in their warehouses tend to turn a blind eye when they see damages. They're not sure what they can do, how they can overcome it. They're not sure who to call, how to maintain it properly to ensure that it is rectified. And it's something that can cost you a marginal amount right now, and if not action immediately, could end up being quite expensive later. One of the questions we very often asked is, what governing bodies are there that oversee the racking in South Africa? Now, internationally there's a number of organizations. A lot of them are interwoven, and this could actually be a topic by itself. We could literally just be discussing this for a couple of hours. It is that interwound. In South Africa, we do not really have a governing body, barring that of the South African Occupational Health and Safety Act, which does require that as employers we have to provide for a safe work environment for our employees. In Europe, they've got the European norms, which is largely quite a detailed engineering institution where they detail all the specifics surrounding how racking should be designed, manufactured, installed, and maintained. Taking from that, you've got the Storage Equipment Manufacturers Association. It's a group of manufacturers in Europe that follow the legislative rules enforced by the European norms. You've also got the American standards, ANSI standards, Australian standards. There's a number of these organizations. We don't want to go into too much of that. What we are finding is the general overall requirement coming out of these is that they require your racking to be properly maintained. They're required to be certified on an annual basis. Now in South Africa, we're finding more and more that companies are wanting to do this. They needing to have their racking certified due to their international shareholding, being a blue chip organization, or one of the newest things, insurance policies. Your insurance is requiring that you have your racking properly maintained and certified. Should you have an incident, they are reluctant to pay out unless you can produce a document stating that you have actively been following up on this and ensuring that your rack is in a safe condition. We've been requested to investigate a number of rack lapses in South Africa, and largely by the insurance companies, where they request we go and they identify what the main reason was. Sadly, with the hope to not being having to pay out a large claim, they would like us to try and identify who was at fault. Sadly, we've also in these investigations identified one or two instances where the insurance policy was not honoured and it was not paid out. The racking just purely wasn't maintained. There was no regular maintenance programs in place. It wasn't certified, and it was a requirement as under the policy underwriters. Unfortunately, the company had to take that one on the chin. So this begs your question, is your racking safe? Is my racking safe? And would you know? Now there's the obvious. If you look at this picture, it's pretty obvious that's not safe, and that is actually an image taken from one of the warehouses that we had to go and investigate. The guy said, yeah, I might have a few racking concerns. If you load that system, there's no doubt that's going to come tumbling down and you will have a massive issue on your plate. It's pretty easy for any warehouse manager to walk through his racks, see that and say, okay, I have a problem, I need to get this resolved. Another obvious one, and the first answer might not look that obvious, but the closer you look at it, you can see this beam is not even connected whatsoever. We actually found this in a warehouse the other day. It was fully loaded. There was 2 tons on either side of this upright and the beam just holding by a couple of tech screws. It's a great advert if you're a tech screw manufacturer, not such a great advert if you're a rack manufacturer. That's not really what you want to sell. Exceptionally dangerous, not long lasting, and it's just an incident waiting to happen. Those are the obvious ones, but what about the less obvious ones? When you look at the racking like this, everything looks fine and dandy. However, if you look a little bit closer, you can see that the one half of the beam is not even connected in at all. Now that's something that any untrained professional and any untrained logistical manager will walk past, not really pay much attention to, not notice it. For no default to their own, they're just not looking for problems like that. We see this all the time. One of the main reasons why we see rack collapses is guys come give us a call and they say, my beam just popped out. It's fallen out, all my product's fallen out. Number one, beams don't just pop out. Generally, they quite listen to what they're told and they're not in the habit of jumping out. What happens is they've started off in situations like this. Perhaps the pallet underneath is offloaded, bumped at the bottom. Then it's sitting totally out and hanging on by a lock pin at best. Over time, it's just going to fail, normally in the middle of the night, hopefully in the middle of the night. And everyone wonders, why did it just pop out? It was a process and it took a number of days before it got to that point. Another one that's not so obvious, everything looks great in this photo. Upon closer inspection, you can see this beam is severely overloaded. It is deflecting way past tolerance. We'll touch on this a bit later. There is allowable tolerance. This one was sadly out of tolerance. Another one, you look at the racking, initially looks okay. Look a little bit closer and you can see that the racking is completely leaning over the one on the right. It is completely out of plan, tilting forward. Now, you as a person, if you've ever tried to hold a heavy package, the lower you hold it, the easier it is to hold. When you're holding it up high by your chest and you lean slightly forward, you want to fall off your feet and onto your face. Same thing happens with racking. The racking will want to tend to fall over. A slight bump on the front, perhaps where there's a weak spot, and this will come collapsing down. So what can we as warehouse managers do, and what should we look out for? Now, I'm quite a simple guy, and I like to work on acronyms. It just helps me remember what I need to look at for warehouses, and it's just something that might stick with you. You might be able to take it after this presentation, go and take a walk in your own warehouse and have a look around there. So if we look at it, and we're going to touch on 6 main points over here, just points to consider going forward. I hope you'll take away from this presentation. Great piece of German engineering, BMW 135i, stunning piece of machinery. If we just take this and each number representing a different facet of rack safety, we could look at the 1 representing 10 millimeters, and that is on your bracing structures. Your braces are only allowed to be out of spec by 10 millimeters. What I mean by that, if you had to hold a straight edge over your brace in any direction, it's not allowed to be deflecting by more than 10 millimeters. If it is, sadly, your racking is not safe and you need to action it and do something about it. We have actually had an instance where it wasn't so much the case that the racking was slightly damaged. The brace was altogether missing. We actually had to investigate the claim. It was found that somewhere along the line when it was installed, one of the nuts was not fastened properly onto the brace. And it's just the bolt pulled through and the brace came out and the rack came tumbling down. Insurance did not pay out in that instant. The 3 and the 135, that also, if you take a straight edge, you put it up against the face of your upright over the span of a meter, it is only allowed to have 3 millimeters tolerance deflection. So in other words, you can only have a gap of 3 millimeters between the straight edge and the face of your upright. Any more than that, and you cannot safely estimate what the carrying capacity of the rack is. A simple estimation would be that your rack, through a damage like this, would be able to carry about 80% less than what it was ultimately designed for. If you have a look at the 5 mils in the left and right direction, again, you hold your straight edge over 1 meter span, you're only allowed to be 5 millimeters out. Any more than that, again, you can't estimate safely what the rack can carry. What's important to note is that although you might have a 5 millimeter space or 6 millimeter space, so you're out of tolerance, doesn't necessarily mean your rack's going to immediately come down. What it does more and often show is that your racking has got a weak spot. The next time the reach truck driver comes, has a bad day and bumps that spot, it's already weakened. It doesn't go from slightly damaged, it goes to completely damaged, and that's generally when we tend to find the collapses. Over here we look at a SLK 200, all alongs of my liking, fantastic motor vehicle. Again, if we take it over here, the 200 would represent span and deflection in beams. If you take the length of your beam, what I mean by the length is your cut size, the distance between your inside of your connectors. Take that distance, typical FMCG environment, that span would typically be around the 2700 mark, 2700, 2743, around about there. You take that, you divide it by 200, and you'll get to a figure. Now, in this case, it's about 13.5 millimeters. What that means is if you had to hold a straight edge going across, your beam may not deflect more than 13.5 millimeters. If it does, you've got a problem, you're outside of tolerance. That's the one part of it. The other part of it is that deflection is allowable. So you all have all the way up until 13.5 millimeters. That is normal. You're loading in 2 tons on a beam. It's going to move. It's going to deflect. We often get called by customers saying, my beams are bending through. Why are they going to do this? Everything's going to come tumbling down. You get to site, you measure it. You're sitting with 8 millimeters over 2700. It's within tolerance. It's totally plausible. What is critical, though, is when you unload it, the beam needs to return back to its original position. So in other words, there must be no deflection once offloaded. If there's still deflection, then you know you have a problem in your structure and some further investigation will be required. If you look at ultimate piece of machinery, the Mercedes GLE 350, this is one of the largest overlooked items of safety we find in warehouses, largely because it's not very easy to measure, it's not very easy to define or identify. Over here, you would need a professional rack inspection conducted in your warehouse to identify these problems. Most of the time, it's not as exaggerated as in this picture. But if you take the span over here for every meter, we call it the principle of 1 in 350. So for every 450 millimeters, you're allowed to be 1 millimeter out on the left and right axis. So if you take a meter span, you're allowed to be just under 3 millimeters leaning forward or back on your racking. Any more than that, and your racking is considered out of plumb. Easy thing to rectify. Get a professional team in there. They can actually just shim up the racking, get it perpendicular again, and problem solved. Yet, sadly, one of the main causes we find for rack collapses in the country. Something that, again, is not easy to identify, and we have touched on this earlier when we were looking at reasons why racking systems fail, is your product profile changes. Possibly you want to add another layer onto your skews. Your beams are too close together, and you think, not a problem, we'll just go and we'll take one of the beams out or move it up or move it down. You've got to keep in mind that when a racking system is designed and sold to you, there's a number of issues that are considered. Number one, the carrying capacity of each individual component. Now, the beams have a carrying capacity. The frames have a carrying capacity. Put together, they have a separate carrying capacity. And that is largely dictated by the spacing of the beams. Now, if you take one beam and you move it further apart, either the distance between two beams or the distance from the floor to the first beam, you move them apart by as little as 300 millimeters. You can actually effectively decrease the carrying capacity of your racking by 20%. Now, if your rack was fully loaded to start with, you move one beam, no doubt you probably put more weight on it because you put a bigger spacing in, all of a sudden you've overloaded your system. That, coupled by the fact that the racking can now carry 20% less than what it was originally designed for, you potentially in a very dangerous position. You take that, you couple it with a couple of damages, and you have a YouTube clip that does the rounds. So how do we ensure that our rack is in safe condition? I mentioned that insurance companies are requiring this, and it's become quite a word that's at the forefront of most professionals' lips lately, is rack certification. Is my rack certified? I need to get my rack certified. There's been a couple of derivatives of this. People will mention, oh, we need to get structural certification done. Can you come and do load testing on my racking? Or can you ultimately come and do certification in line with the EN norms? Now, if you look at each of these, structural certification is where you would get a structural engineer, someone with a professional number, a PR-Eng number. They'll come in there, they'll be able to assess your material, your racking, your design, and confirm what carrying capacity you should safely be able to put in your system based on their training and experience. They'll normally have insurance in place to ensure that they can guarantee that. Load testing, it's such a loose term. People generally tend to use the term instead of rack certification, thinking it means the same thing. It doesn't. Load testing is you're actually trying to test what the system can carry from a physical point of view. It's not a theoretical test, it's a physical. You're going to take for want of a better word, a system, set it up, frames, beams, everything like that. You're going to load it to its max and see when it fails. Now, the problem with this is you've tested that system that you've loaded until it's failed. So number one, it's rendered useless, it's expensive, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the racking in your warehouse can be the same. It's not really a true reflection or an ultimate way of certifying your racking. It also only looks at one aspect. What is the shear point of my racking? It doesn't take into account all the rest of the stuff. What is the damage condition like on my racking? How perpendicular is it? Is it standing? Has it been correctly installed? Are there any items missing? Has something been changed in my system? So what we've tried to focus on is certification in line with the EN norms or the EN specifications. As I mentioned, in South Africa, we don't have a governing body that overlooks this. So we tend to follow the European councils. We have, for a large part, taken on their regulations, and that's what we follow in South Africa. Under the certification in line with EN norms, there are a number of different codes that are applicable to this, and they each govern the way that the racking is designed, manufactured, installed, and ultimately maintained. Obviously going through the individual terms and definitions as well. These are the codes that we would follow. It's largely written in engineering terms, quite specific, not an easy read for a general type person. But if you contact the right rack supplier, they will be very familiar with these, know what their requirements are, know how to look for them, and ensure that your racking complies with all of the relevant specifications. I'm not going to go through each one. I think it'll turn into a snooze fest, and no one will ultimately enjoy the presentation. So how does certification work? Customers will generally phone and they'll say, I want to certify my racking, and they'll think, oh, it's just a thing of you're going to rock up in their warehouse and you're going to automatically stick a new load sign on the side of their racking and everything will move forward from there. Sadly, it's not that. It is a bit of a process. What it requires is typically an initial site visit. A trained individual, company will go to site, gather the necessary information they need to identify what type of racking you have in place. They would put together a proposal for conducting the certification inspection. We have your racking inspected by qualified, trained people with the necessary credentials that can inspect it in line with those EN norms. The accredited inspection will be conducted. Depending on how big your warehouse is, this could be a couple of days. It's not just a general browse through your warehouse saying your warehouse is good. Every aspect of your racking is looked at. You'd be looking at the racking specification. In other words, who manufactured the racking? What is the design? Is it a lip channel section? Is it a bottleneck section? What is the profile that you're using? How far apart are your beams? What is the thickness of the material? They'll be looking at the detailed defects. They'll be identifying all those tolerances we mentioned with regards to your bracing, your beams, your uprights. In other words, is it damaged in any way? What would have to be rectified or repaired in your warehouse? And then lastly, like we mentioned in the Merck GLE 350, they'll look at your plumbness. They'll look at how your racking is installed. Is it installed perpendicular? Is it standing in the correct manner? Has it been anchored to the floor properly? Is it safe for loading? All of those things together culminate in the actual certification report, which is submitted, and then it would be used to tell the customer and guide them in what their racking system could carry if it was in right standing, if it was in good condition. It'll also be used to identify what might need to be changed in your warehouse to ensure your racking can carry the profile or the right carrying capacity of what your product is. So ensure that you're not going to overload your system or inadvertently put yourself in a dangerous or compromising position. So all these things are put together, presented to a customer, and then the customer would then decide, okay, let's go forward, we want to repair this racking. Once the racking is repaired, that's only when you get to the point where you can say, okay, now we can safely certify your racking. Go ahead, stick a load sign on the side of your racking. Make sure everyone in the warehouse knows that this is what it can carry. On there, you'll have your load sign, and it'll dictate 4 inspections that are required. Every quarter, your racking will be inspected. An individual will come back out there and make sure that your racking has been properly maintained and that it can still carry what those safe workload signs say it can. In that way, should you have any incidents in your warehouse, number one, it won't be something that needs much investigation. It's a simple report that's handed to an insurance policy, and you're covered. Once these quarterly inspections are done, you'll be requested, obviously, should there be any negligence or damages to your racking, those will be repaired, and your racking can be recertified on an annual basis, and the loop will just continue. That's a safe and effective rack maintenance program. Cost effective, easy to maintain, easy to manage, all very transparent. Everyone can see exactly what's going on in the warehouse. There's no nasty surprises from any party. That is an example of what your load sign would look like. It details all the specifics surrounding your racking, the tolerances, the beam levels, so you can identify if anything has been moved in your rack, what the max load capacity for your whole bay is, the max load capacity for the individual beams, your pallets, and it will confirm that your racking is now ultimately certified. This is just generally your show and tell item that's on the side of the racking. It explains to anyone that walks in your warehouse, should you be audited or anything like that by the Department of Labour, they'll be quite pleased to see this, and they'll know that you have a proper rack maintenance program in place. Now, what can you do to prevent your racking from getting damaged? We've had it certified, we've got a program in place, we're ensuring that if there is anything that happens that's damaged, it's rectified, but how do we limit those little odds and sods and damages? Now, there's a number of ways, starting with steel post protection, but the first question you have to ask yourself is, how effective is the protection that I put in place? Over here, this is one of the warehouses that we had to investigate. Awesome little steel post protector in excellent condition, just totally ineffective and not really placed in the right place. Total wrong post protector for the job, and the result is a damaged upright while the rack was being loaded. That is completely unsafe, and the racking had to be replaced. Some of the more prominent ones, and we tend to find them to be far more effective in the country, is the technopolymer upright protectors. There's a large option available in the country. They're bigger than your standard steel post protectors of only 400 millimeters. These guys are 600 millimeters high. They protect a larger surface area. What is nice about them is they're not anchored to the floor. So when your 2-ton forklift comes and bumps the post protector, which is going to happen if a post protector is doing its job, it's not going to go and damage your floor by transferring that damage into the anchors which are going into your floor and ultimately cracking your highly expensive FM1 floor. You don't really want to go through that. With a polymer post protector that just snaps onto the front of the upright. If it's at all damaged, you simply take it off, replace it, and life carries on. There's no damage to floor, and it's quite a cost-effective solution. Other options that are available are the rack armor ones, largely distributed by One Touch Solutions in South Africa. Highly effective, awesome pieces of equipment. Another one that's used in the industry is the Proms Protected, rack protector. Comes as a 3-piece. Great benefit of this is should one of the items be damaged, the other 2 are still fine. You only have to replace the one damaged one. Lands up saving you a bit of money in the long run. So as an introduction, my name's Karl. As I mentioned, I'm from the company Ross International Rack Repair. What we do is we are South Africa's largest rack maintenance, repair and certification company in the country. We specialize in annual certifications, rack repairs, rack relocations, rack modifications, extensions, modifications, anything you want to do with your racking in a cost-effective and professional manner to make sure that your racking is going to be safe when it's done. We're the guys to do it. We have 20 years experience internationally, 12 years, a dozen years in South Africa locally. We have a global reach, national presence with offices in Gauteng, KZN, and the Western Cape. We're able to effectively look after your racking wherever you are in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you for the opportunity and letting me talk to you today, and we hope to hear from you soon.